You've seen the movie 17 times. You know every line, every pause, every scene transition. You know exactly when the music swells and when the silence hits. And yet, when you're tired or overwhelmed or just done with the day, you find yourself pressing play again. Not because you forgot what happens, but because you remember exactly what happens. And somehow, that's the point. From the outside, it looks like you're stuck, like you can't move on, like you've run out of curiosity. But here's what people don't understand. You're not avoiding new things because you're lazy. You're returning to something familiar because your brain already knows it's safe there. And that changes everything. This isn't a flaw in your personality. It's not a sign that you've stopped growing or that you've become predictable. Rewatching the same movie over and over is one of the quietest ways your nervous system asks for rest. And if you've ever felt a little embarrassed about it, a little defensive when someone asks why you're watching that again, this is for you. Because what you're doing makes more sense than you think. The first thing to understand is that your brain treats familiarity like medicine. When life feels unpredictable, when your day has been full of decisions, when you've had to navigate conversations and expectations and things you couldn't control, your mind craves something it doesn't have to figure out. A movie you've seen before requires nothing from you. No new characters to track, no plot twists to process, no emotional risk. You already know the ending, and that knowing is the relief. Think about why children ask for the same bedtime story every night. It's not because they've forgotten. It's because the repetition soothes them. The predictability becomes the comfort. Adults aren't that different. We just hide it better. We feel like we're supposed to want novelty. We feel like mature people seek out new experiences, challenge themselves, expand their horizons. And sometimes we do. But sometimes we just need the story we already know by heart. There's also something deeper happening here. When you return to a movie you love, you're not just watching the story. You're returning to a version of yourself. Maybe the first time you watched it, you were younger. Maybe you were going through something. Maybe you were with someone. The film holds those memories without asking you to revisit them directly. It lets you feel close to who you were, without having to explain anything. It becomes a kind of emotional time travel, except gentler, softer. You're not reliving the past. You're sitting beside it. And this is where it gets interesting. The movies we return to often reflect something we're still processing, not always consciously. But the themes that pull us back, the characters we root for, the moments that still make us cry even though we've seen them 100 times, they're mirrors. They show us what we're still working through. A film about loyalty might call to someone who's been betrayed. A story about escape might speak to someone who feels trapped. A romance might be the only space where someone allows themselves to feel longing without judgment. You don't rewatch randomly. You rewatch what resonates. And the resonance tells a story about you. But here's the part nobody tells you. This behavior changes as you get older. Not because you outgrow it, but because what you need from it shifts. In your 20s, you might rewatch films that made you feel powerful. Action, adventure, stories where someone overcomes impossible odds. In your 30s, you might gravitate towards something slower, more emotional. Films about relationships, or meaning, or loss. In your 40s and beyond, you might find yourself returning to the things that simply feel like home, regardless of genre, regardless of plot. You're not choosing based on taste anymore. You're choosing based on what steadies you. The movie becomes less about entertainment and more about regulation. Your nervous system learns that this film equals safety. This soundtrack equals calm. This ending equals resolution. And when life refuses to give you resolution, the film gives it to you anyway. Artificially, yes. But the relief is still real. There's also a cognitive layer to this. Your brain has limited energy. Every new piece of information it encounters requires processing. New movies, new characters, new emotional arcs, they all cost something. When you're already depleted, spending that energy feels impossible. But a familiar movie? Your brain already has the map. It doesn't need to build new pathways. It just walks the ones that already exist. And that ease, that low-effort engagement, becomes a form of rest that doesn't look like rest. You're not doing nothing. You're recovering while appearing to be entertained. Some people recharge through stillness, others through activity, and some of us recharge by letting our minds wander through a landscape they already know. It's not avoidance, it's maintenance. And there's something else, something harder to name. When you watch the same film again, you're choosing a world where things turn out the way they're supposed to, where the hero wins, or the lovers reunite, or the ending feels right even if it's sad. Real life doesn't promise that. Real life is ambiguous, unfinished, unpredictable. But inside that movie, everything follows a script. And for 90 minutes, you get to live in a world where outcomes are guaranteed. That's not weakness. That's a need. A very human need for closure, for rhythm, for things that make sense. You might have noticed that you reach for these films at specific times. Late at night, after hard conversations, when you're sick, when you're anxious, when the world feels too loud. That pattern isn't random. Your brain has learned that this particular film brings your system down. It knows that this story lowers your heart rate, softens your shoulders, quiets the noise. And so it asks for it, again and again, not out of habit, out of wisdom. The shame around this comes from a culture that prizes novelty above all else. We're told that growth means constantly seeking the new, that staying in one place is stagnation. But your nervous system doesn't work that way. Sometimes, the most sophisticated thing your brain can do is return to what already works. That's not regression, that's efficiency. And maybe, on some level, it's also loyalty. You've built a relationship with that film. It's been there for you in ways people haven't. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't need anything from you. It just plays. And you just watch. And somewhere in that exchange, something settles inside you. So the next time you find yourself pressing play on a movie you've seen more times than you can count, you don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to feel like you're doing something wrong. You're doing something deeply human. You're finding shelter in a story that already knows how to hold you. You're giving your mind permission to stop working, stop analyzing, stop preparing. You're returning to a place where the ending is already written, and that ending doesn't depend on you getting it right. Some people have favorite songs. Some have favorite places. You have a movie that feels like a room you can always go back to. A room where nothing has changed. A room where you already know where everything is. And maybe that's not something to fix. Maybe it's just something to notice. And then, gently, let yourself have.